Welcome to NCFM, Women Against False Accusations. This podcast shares truth about false accusations of sexual assault and abuse, revealing just how easy it is for the men in our lives to be falsely accused. You will hear true, heartbreaking, and sometimes shocking stories from the mothers, sisters, wives, friends, and advocates of men living the trauma of a society that has moved away from presumption of innocence. We invite you to join us as we take a stand for truth. All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Women Against False Accusations. This podcast is sponsored in part by our parent organization, NCFM, who has been fighting for men and the women who love them since 1977. Today, I'd like to introduce you to our host and the president of NCFM Women Against False Accusations, Lori DeBolt.
Thank you so much, Val, and thank you for all the work that you do for us. Today, I would like to introduce Kay. Kay is an amazing spokeswoman for a case that I have never come across before. It is truly bizarre. She advocates for Daniel Holtzclaw, and I'd like to bring her on to tell the story of Daniel. Kay, if you may, please.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, first of all, for having me and giving me a platform to talk about this case. I am Kay Sanders, and I got involved in this case a little over 5 years ago. I did not know this family. I knew of Daniel's father, who is a police officer in my hometown, but I only knew about him just from his occupation, and he is a lieutenant. So his name was in the paper all the time, and I had one interaction with him at my business. When I first decided to take a look at this case, I had kind of not followed the news very much, as far as, because it was in the news all the time, and I was aware of that, but I wasn't really watching the news at that point in my life. I was seeing the headlines. I mean, they would blast Holtzclaw across the headline every day during this lengthy trial. And I thought, like everyone else, I thought him guilty instantly without really, it was just, the nature of the allegations are so horrific, and the number of accusers and the way they were presenting it, that all these women came forward. I really took the news that I did hear or read at face value, which I'll never do again. And so I thought him guilty. And so during the holiday season, right after his conviction, I decided to look at the 2-hour interview of Daniel Holtzclaw that happened, within, I think it happened 14 hours after the allegations. And what I was my goal was to see if he was a good liar or not. And I feel horrible for saying that out loud right now, but it's just the truth. And I watched the 2-hour interview and I was sick. And although I didn't know Daniel, so I didn't know his, I didn't know his personality. I didn't understand that the things that I felt were quirky or kind of bizarre in his speech patterns, or things, the way he spoke, that was just Daniel. And that the interview was just Daniel being honest. I know that now because I've spent quite a bit of time with Daniel, but at the time I didn't. And so I watched it again. So I spent 4 hours that day going over that 2-hour interview twice. And I encourage people to go to YouTube and find that 2-hour interview. I mean, it will just, well, I don't know. Some people watch it and they judge him and they say, he's guilty. Look at him. He's answers things nervously, and that equates to guilt. But I think we all come in with our own brand of bias when we're looking at something. This has been a big wake up call for me to check my own. So, I've been just advocating for Daniel and developed a relationship with him, just to support him, because I know he will be free one day. This is just too ludicrous. I mean, it's going to be tough because of the corruption, and it's really hard to break through that. We need things to happen, like we need an honest district attorney in Oklahoma County. And we have a shot at that coming up here because the DA is retiring. And there is one good candidate who might take a look at his case. But I'll just go ahead and try to jump into the case and try to cover it. It's going to be really difficult because, like I said, it's basically 13 cases rolled into one. So Daniel Holtzclaw was an Oklahoma City police officer. He is a Japanese American. His mother is full Japanese. His father is American. And I mean, he was truly railroaded by these two detectives. Whether they are just stupid, or I believe one of them to be corrupt for sure. He got caught lying on the stand many times. Just shadiness from the beginning. But he was wrongfully convicted in December of 2015 of sexually assaulting 8 of 13 Black complainants. And then he was sentenced to 263 years in prison. Really, due to a presumption of guilt by everyone who watched the media, the inflammatory media coverage, flawed forensic DNA analysis, a bias and faulty police investigation, ineffective trial counsel, which I hate to harp on that because I cannot imagine being that attorney or those attorneys who had to mount a defense for basically 13 cases, all wrapped into one, and the charges being what they were. And then, of course, the clincher was prosecutorial misconduct, which, unfortunately we see in a lot of these cases. The tragedy of Daniel's case is that, our society is really working, and I really feel, I know we've gone backwards a lot, but I really feel that our society is working to try to address racism and sexism and police brutality. But those things cause people to convict an innocent man. They believed that Daniel was guilty after the allegations were filed. They had an unsupported rape kit or SANE kit where it came back negative, but they found a way to proceed with the investigation anyway. The Oklahoma City police, they ignored evidence that pointed to his innocence, and then just crafted a case against him. People usually start off with the after hours traffic stop that happened on June 18th, 2014, when they're talking about this case. And I'm going to start there, but I'm going to go backwards from that because that's what the police had to do to be able to make this case stick. Because like I said, there was nothing, there was nothing to support this lady's allegations. So Daniel worked he worked overnight. So he came in at 4 and he left at 2 a.m. So 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. He had, like he always did, and they proved at trial, at some point on his drive home, just like a block away from the station, he was in the bad habit of shutting his computer down on the way home. After hours traffic stops were not something that he customarily did. But so this evening of June 18th, 2014, he was traveling home after his shift. He turns his computer off. He gets a mile or so down the road and he notices this car swerving out of its lane. And he makes the decision to just go ahead and stop it to make sure that this person was okay to drive. And so he pulls her over. He brings her back to the car. And I guess I should maybe stick with I should probably be a little bit more organized here. And
You're fine. You're fine.
So he brings her back to the car, and she consents to a search. He tells her why he stopped her. She consents to a search. He puts her in the back of the car. She says that I'm sorry.
And Daniel, just to make clear, he's a police officer.
He is a police officer. He was a new police officer, basically 3 years on the force. I mean, his dream was that he would make it into the NFL. He was an outstanding football player his whole life, got a scholarship, played it in Michigan. And, when the draft came, they just didn't call his name. He did have after the draft was over, he did have a time where he went to Detroit, I think with the Lions, and kind of had a little tryout, but he didn't end up making the cut really. And so he followed in his parents' footsteps. His dad, an officer, his mom was a police officer in Japan. So law enforcement was something that he knew. And, Daniel's a really principled, hardworking, just a really stand-up guy. He's pretty shy, which doesn't match his stature because Daniel's 6'3". At the time, he was about 240, 50 pounds. So he's an intimidating presence when you're standing beside him. It's definitely not someone you would forget if you came into contact with him. Anyway, so the allegation with Janie Liggins, the after-hour traffic stop, said after Daniel did the traffic stop of Janie Liggins for swerving near the busy intersection at 2 a.m., she contacted the police 2 hours later and made the allegation that he had made her expose herself, had made her pull her pants down, and had made her give him oral sex for about 10 seconds, which is ludicrous in itself, 10 seconds. So at trial, she accused the officer of pulling up beside her to look inside her car, which she had really dark tinted windows. So that was kind of a strange. She said that he profiled her that way, but you couldn't see inside her car. That was one of the things. She testified the officer said she was swerving, but she said she did not swerve. She said he pat searched her while her hands were on the passenger side of the patrol car above the door. Then he said he had her sit in the back seat while he searched her car for drugs. Then at which he did search her car. She said he made her pull her pants down to her knees to reveal her crotch area. Finally, she said that after a van passed by the scene, he orally, he had her give him oral sex 2 different times for a few seconds. She says that she pulled her pants down to her knees and then said that she couldn't do this and pulled them back up. Let's see. At Liggins, at preliminary and at trial, she said that Holtzclaw's belt was not unbuckled, just unzipped. So his pants were just unzipped, which that ended up being what everyone landed on for trial, was that he assaulted these women through the unzipped fly of his buckled and belted pants. And he wore compression underwear with no fly. So if you just think about the gear that he had on as an officer, and think about making that happen. Some women say that, his penis was erect, which would make it even more difficult to maneuver and expose himself through the unzipped fly of his buckled pants, with the whole another shirt, bulletproof vest on, the no-fly underwear. He wore also shirt stays, which they attach to the bottom of your shirt. And then it's like I think they attached like to your elastic thing to the bottom of your feet, and it keeps your shirt taut. So all of
that
those
sounds like a whole lot of barriers to a couple of seconds of something that would potentially get you locked up for 223 years.
Right. I mean, it's just to think that you could, in that situation, that most of the women say that, they weren't exactly sure. His penis just appeared. Like here, most of them were sitting in the back seat of the car, and he was standing there like he would have been if he was questioning if he had him in the back seat of the car. And even though they were right there, they didn't see him actually get his penis out. It just appeared. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So she goes home, and she lived with her daughter, who, come to find out, was really involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, which was, really had just fired up as a result of things that had happened in Florida with Zimmerman and other, all the cases around the United States before summer of 2014. And so she just, I believe, because it took 2 hours to go report. And there was a lot of back and forth about, they called the police station and no one answered. This particular person, Janie Liggins, she had a relative who worked at the same station that Daniel worked out of, Spring Lake. And so they called his mom, I guess, and they told her that Daniel made her remove her clothes, which was a different version of the story. He said, hey, tell them to call the police department, call headquarters, they'll send an officer out. Call 911, they'll send an officer out. Instead, I think they looked up the non-emergency number at Spring Lake. They say that they called Spring Lake and no one answered. They went to Spring Lake and no one was there. I mean, they did it. If they did all these things, really, who knows if they did. What they didn't do was take the advice of the law enforcement relative who told them to call 911. So 2 hours later, they're driving around and they see two police cars in a parking lot talking to each other, and they stop and report that way. And so once that happened, and this was just a little bit before 4 a.m. when this happened, once that happened, just a flurry of activity happened because people were dispatched out to their location. They took her for a SANE test immediately. In the course of the next few hours, they were already getting the car that she was in, that her boyfriend had taken to work. And they had begun the process of trying to confirm her story, which it didn't check out. What they ended up finding was that the SANE test was negative for Daniel's DNA in her mouth. And just to push that a little bit farther, you're going to find out that in his last shift, he was accused of assaulting 3 women, not just her, but 2 others. And one, he was accused of assaulting at 10 minutes until 2. So basically 20 minutes before, 15 or 20 minutes before he's assaulting Janie Liggins, he supposedly raped a woman, raped her. What would you think, if he also allegedly made that woman give him oral sex? So you would expect to find more DNA than just Janie Liggins if someone else had their mouth on his penis. If 2 other people, which it is alleged that 3 people had their mouths on his penis, no DNA, only hers. She also.
When did these other people come to the surface? Like, when was this part of this investigation that same morning of like after 4 a.m.?
No, not that same morning. That morning, all they were investigating, or they just thought they had this one victim. They didn't turn it into a serial rape case until, it didn't take them long to turn it into a serial rape case. Because I imagine probably what happened was the brass was thinking, oh, this is not good. How are we here in Oklahoma City? This is going to be a huge storm. We're going to be all over the news. When this hits, we're going to, people are going to come and protest, and it's going to be a mess. we didn't want protests in Oklahoma City. We just spent billions of dollars developing our downtown Oklahoma City into this magnificent place that there's hardly anything like it in the United States now. They've spent billions of dollars. They didn't want that to happen. So the other thing that they were looking for, she said that he made her put her hands on the car in a specific place, and that he put his hands on the car in a specific place. That did not check out. So they basically had nothing. They were not going to be able to pursue any kind of charges against Daniel with this accuser. And so what they did before he even came into lineup at 4:00, so he comes into lineup at 4 p.m. They've been investigating all this whole time that he's sleeping. And they have pulled up another accuser, Terry Morris, who she had accused Daniel, or she had accused an unknown officer of raping her. Well, she says rape. It was really just the same kind of thing. It was really just a oral sodomy. I say just, like that's not just, but I guess I belittle it because it's all crap. But so she had been involved in a disturbance 911 call. First of all, this is the victim, or this is the accuser that I feel the most empathy for, because she's mentally ill. She has drug and alcohol problems. She had been a prostitute in the past. I don't know if she was still prostituting. But this evening, which was like about a month before, so May 8th, 2014, Daniel had stopped Terry Morris, just a traffic stop, or she was on foot. He stopped her, he questioned her. So they had already they had that May 8th date where Daniel had contact with Morris. So on May 24th, when her boyfriend calls 911 because she's destroying his car, and she's just flipping out because she finds out he has another girlfriend, and she really is just, you can hear the 911 call, and she's just devastated. She's beside herself. She's obviously either high on some sort of drugs or under the influence of alcohol, but she's flipping out, and he ends up calling 911. And right before they get there, right as she realizes that he has called the police on her, you can hear on the 911 call, she says, "You called the police? You called the same MFers that raped me?" And so when the police get there, and in the police report, she should be the suspect in the police report because of who placed the call and what they were reporting, what they wanted them to come out for. But she ends up being the victim, which if she may have been truly raped. If they would have investigated her actual claims, they might have, if she were truly raped, they might have found that person. But so that ends up, that 911 scene, that 911 call ends up in a report of her being sexually assaulted by an unknown officer. So this is Memorial Day weekend when this happened. So they were short-staffed. I think they probably really weren't taking this so serious, because I know that they like to say that Daniel chose these women because they were marginalized women and, no one would believe them. But in fact, that's kind of what the police department did. Almost everything they accused Daniel of doing is exactly what they did. So she doesn't really, she gives a report to 3 different officers that evening, and then she walks off into the darkness. She's homeless. So it's not like you're just going to go knock on her door and find her. So when Detective Rocky Gregory, who was assigned the case, comes in on Tuesday, because Monday was a holiday, this had happened Saturday night. So from Saturday to Tuesday, nothing. And he starts investigating and can't find her. He lists a whole bunch of things that he did to locate her, which, the Liggins traffic stop hadn't happened yet, so I have no reason to doubt report ever needed. I have no reason to doubt that he did all those things to locate her, and finally locates her by using a confidential informant, and has her detained. From what his police report says, he wrote in his report, informant located Morris. And then he made an anonymous call to police, and police had her in custody. I had been in the jail on an unrelated arrest when I received this call, where I was then able to speak with Morris. So his report makes you think that they took her to the county jail, but in her initial interview, she's in an interview room at headquarters. So I'm a little bit confused about why the report says that. But so what they did was, when they realized that Janie Liggins, nothing was checking out with her story, they go back and they pull Terry Morris's case again, so she was interviewed. They finally find her. They interview her on June 3rd. She doesn't want to be any part of this. So either she said that to get out of trouble because she knew she was probably going to get arrested, or she really just doesn't want to be a part, or she really was raped where she said she was, or assaulted, I should say. And she just didn't want to go through all of that. So she just begs this detective to leave her alone. I don't want to be a part of this. Leave me alone. He tries to pressure her and make her, feel responsible for other women that this might happen to. She ends up signing a refusal to prosecute form, and she leaves. And you would think that would be the end of it. So that's June 3rd. Then Daniel does the after hours traffic stop on June 18th. Nothing to charge him with the Janie Liggins stuff. So they start looking for Terry Morris again. And they even asked Daniel in his 2-hour interview about Terry Morris, which he did pull her over on May 8th. But she was adamant that her assault happened a few days before the whole 911 call where she was to be arrested. Mm. So that would have been on May 20th or 21st, not May 8th. And she was so adamant that it was just one of those 2 days. She wasn't sure, but she knew it was one of those 2 days. She never came off of that. even through depositions for the civil action that's going on still right now, she still in her deposition said, no, but it wasn't. It was just a few days before the 911 call. I mean, she still stuck to that story. But what they had to do was they had to make her become a part of this case, or there was no case. And then what would happen? I mean, what would happen if no charges were filed? There would have been such an uproar in Oklahoma City. There's just really no telling what would have happened. So they brought her along, and they asked Daniel about her. He didn't remember pulling her over. They told him he did. He said, okay. You know, he wasn't really, even that point in the interview, he didn't realize what was happening to him. He had been in a situation several times for use of force complaints that mostly the ones that he self-reported. There were one or two that he should have reported that he didn't, but he had several use of force complaints, and they used that against him in the media because, like, I didn't understand the definition of use of force. I don't know if you guys do. What do you think the definition of use of force is?
I picture violence and
something
physical.
above and beyond what's
Yes.
reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, what it is any force greater than placing on the cuffs. So if you have to, if someone's fighting you and you have to, use your car to help pin them kind of between the car and yourself to get the cuffs on, or whatever the case may be. One case that he did not report a use of force was a lady named Demetria Campbell, where he had used a brick wall to help get her into cuffs. And she later, after this came out in the media, she filed sexual assault charges against him after she saw that. There was never any mention of sexual assault before. So they get Terry Morris to they're trying to get her to become a part of the case. They've taken Daniel's pants and his belt after his 2-hour interview. You see him stripped down into his compression shorts, and that's all they took, though. I mean, they didn't take his underwear. Detective Gregory doesn't wear gloves when he opens the evidence sack, puts his hand down into the sack, lays it down, and has Daniel put his pants in there. They're rolled up. So they're transferring whatever's on any part of his belt or pants onto as he rolls his pants up. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible collection of the evidence. So they send those pants to our infamous Oklahoma City crime lab that you can read about in many books from the Bob Macy days. And they end up finding female DNA on the fly of his pants. And that sounds pretty freaking incriminating, doesn't it? I mean, when I heard it, I thought, what? Just initially, just the way the news spins it,
Right.
I guess I don't know. I think I was probably too biased back then it's too bad you have to get slapped in the face with something like this to really look at your own bias, I guess I should say.
It almost seems damning that the social media would say that, right? But without all of the other details given. So it almost portrays Daniel as guilty, right? And you said with putting this out on the media, some other woman came forward, right? What woman wouldn't want to get involved with this if there's already others out there?
Yeah, I mean, so Terry Morris, she signs that decline to prosecute, and she leaves. They decide to hunt for her again because they want to talk her into submitting a buccal swabs because they really want to match that female DNA to which the profile ended up being her Adara Gardner, a 16, 17-year-old accuser. It ended up being her DNA. And then unknown DNA from at least one other female and a male. And the male DNA was never disclosed at trial by the crime lab analyst. As a matter of fact, she said it didn't exist. So, I mean, the evidence was misrepresented at trial as far as the panto. So they do use that confidential informant again. And on June 24th, they hunt her down. They put her in the back of a police car. They call Detective Gregory out. She's banging her head against the cage, just flipping out. She doesn't understand why she's being detained. They come out, they show her a photo lineup where she chooses another officer. Oh, she's not sure. She chooses Daniel. Oh, she's not sure. Oh, she's just not sure. No, she doesn't want to be a part of it. She just wants him to leave her alone. She just wants to go. They end up letting her go. She walks away, muttering something like, "This is messed up," or I can't remember exactly what her quote was. Well, so then guess what happens? Then she gets arrested. Then she finds herself in the county jail. And this is the weird part. So detectives don't record all of the interviews, which is suspect. I mean, why? I mean, at trial, they're like, well, we didn't have a recorder. If you're a detective, I mean, I'm sorry, I was a massage therapist for 20 years. I would never show up to a massage without some massage cream. It's a tool.
Right.
Give me a break. You're a horrible detective if you don't have a recorder or a corrupt one, which I think is
you don't have a conversation unless you have a recorder.
Right. Right. And so it's even worse with Terry Morris in the jailhouse interview on July 10th, because the first part of the conversation is not recorded. And the way the jail is set up is it's set up for audio and video. You just push a button outside the room. It's easy. You don't need to bring your recorder, which apparently Rocky did have a recorder because he recorded half of the interview. You can hear the interview starts. You can hear Terry Morris and Lieutenant Musney across the room, and she's going through her new story that matches what they want her to say. Gregory's over here. Yeah, I've got Terry Morris. She called us up here. She wanted to talk to us again, which was total crap. That did not happen. And she tells the story that they want told. She changes the complete location. The reason that Daniel wasn't, looked at, I mean, they looked at his GPS of his car to see, hey, they looked at every officer. Was any officer near the city rescue mission at this time? No cars stopped there anywhere. I mean, even if they were driving by, no cars stopped to match up with her allegations. So if she was assaulted right there near the city rescue mission, it was some police officer with his computer turned off, or it didn't happen at all. And so she changes her story.
I just want to jump in. This has just reminded me of the Jussie Smollett, where Jussie made up the story, right? Except this is worse, in my opinion, because Oklahoma City Police Department set Daniel up for all of these charges. He was wrongly convicted.
Right.
263 years in prison because Oklahoma City Police Department forced people to change their stories. I'm sick. I'm so sick. Yeah.
Well, it is sickening because, you know, and it's sickening what they did to her too, because I mean, these women who we have no idea, because most of the initial interviews weren't recorded. And so we have no idea what kind of coercion was going on. Some of these women were on probation or had charges hanging over their heads. I mean, some of them just had city warrants, which, you know, typically you're not going to get arrested for that. But if they want to, they can. I mean,
certainly. Yeah, I could imagine, right? Them holding it over their head.
Yeah.
Right. Someone just saying, hey, let me turn this into a worse charge than what it already is. Right.
So we just don't know what happened and why women came along to be a part of the case, because the fact of the matter is only 3 women actually came to the police and said, hey, I was assaulted. Not 13 like they say.
13 is amazing. And I think in an earlier conversation that you and I had on the phone, right, someone had made mention that if you just say one did it, there's not as much attention. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
The female detective, Kim Davis, she was in an interview for a documentary called Daniel in the Den, which is also on YouTube. It's a hour and a half, 2-part series about the case. And she said, well, you know, when you have one, we don't always get things done. But with 13 and the MO's the same and the verbiage is all the same, then you can get things done. You know, except the MO wasn't the same and the verbiage wasn't the same, but like, who really cares about that? Those are extra facts. Yeah. So now they've got Terry Morris on board, and they have been looking for accusers this whole time. They've got 3 or 4 detectives on it, but the 2 main detectives were Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory. So the rest of the accusers, I'm just going to run through them real quick, because it was just really piling on at that point. Yeah. I mean, I will talk about the other 2 accusers who he supposedly raped, assaulted in that last shift of his. One was Kayla Lyles, and she is one who came forward on her own after it was already on the news, after she had missed a probation meeting. And I truly believe that she used this to keep from having her probation revoked. I mean, she misses her probation 1 month. Well, I think what happened is there were 2 months in between. So she comes in after the traffic stop after the June 18th traffic stop that kicked it all off. She has a probation meeting and she doesn't mention it. at that one, misses her next one, and then when she comes to her next one, she says, you know, she's just been having a lot of problems because she was raped by that Oklahoma City police officer that's been on the news. You know, she tells a story about him taking her. She claims at trial that Daniel raped her for 20 to 30 minutes, and also orally sodomized her on June 18th. That he had her in one location and then took her in his car to another location, which ended up being a common theme with a couple other accusers. So it's really clear that detectives were feeding these accusers, well, I know you can't remember, but do you think maybe it happened? Could it have been over here at this abandoned schoolyard? Or,
oh yeah,
I mean, they fed him so many things, just insane. So this is the one who supposedly he assaulted at 1:30 a.m. and then he assaulted Janie Liggins a little bit after 2 a.m. He was found not guilty on all of her counts, Kayla Lyles. The other one from that evening was Adara Gardner, and she's the 16-year-old. Adara, oh man, bless her heart, man, this girl, she had so many, none of these women had any kind of a great upbringing or chance. Like, I mean, they didn't have the kind of life I had, for sure.
right.
Adara said she was stopped by Holtzclaw. She was with two other friends. They were fighting in the street. And he stopped them. He pat searched all three of them, which the male from that pat search could possibly be the unknown male DNA on Daniel's pants. Which, by the way, they won't give us Daniel's pants to retest because they don't want us to retest them because, you know, that's how that goes. That's how justice works. They don't want us to see that, you know, see clearly that there are no stains on these pants, that he raped two women and had three women, you know, give him oral sex. So you expect to find vaginal fluid and saliva on his dark pants. He's not going to get away. He's not going to commit all those acts and not have any kind of staining on those pants. And from the crappy pictures that we have, because we haven't been able to, they won't give us the original digital files, the high quality photos. We're still trying to get those, just to show that there's nothing on his pants. And that supports that the assaults did not happen.
And they're rejecting to turn those over. They're refusing.
They're fighting it. Yeah. Right now, we're trying to get them in civil through the civil trial, which that's set for a settlement conference the end of this month. And if the city settles, like, as a quick aside, I'll go ahead since we're talking about that and cover the civil trial. 11 of the 13 women filed a civil lawsuit against him, and former Chief Bill City, Rocky Gregory, the detective, some other personnel who it's baffling to know why they included them in the civil suit. It's the attorneys don't know the case very well because it would take a long time to figure it out. So their cases are really not accurate charges, even against the brass. Everyone has been released, granted summary judgment, which I never knew what that meant. It means you're released from this lawsuit. Everyone has been released except Daniel at this point. So why is a settlement conference happening for the city of Oklahoma City to figure out how much they're going to offer these women? I don't think the taxpayers of Oklahoma County realize that the city has been released from this lawsuit. I think they would be really mad if we're just going to go ahead and give them a bunch of money so this can go away, A, or B, let's give them a bunch of money so Holtzclaw can't get any more discovery through the course of the civil trial. And that may be more what it is.
Wow.
So, hopefully we're going to have an answer to how that plays out. Probably by the middle of April. And then we do have a request for the pants pending before that civil judge, which it's been, I don't know what the proper terminology is. It's been tabled for now because I guess it'll be a moot point if they settle, and as a condition of settling, they release Daniel from the suit. Then there'll be no trial. So there's that. So Adara Gardner, so he did search her and her friends. He got called away to another call. He came back. She lives in his territory that he patrols. He came back. He saw her again. He stopped. He talked to her. He gave her a ride home. She says that, and he called her mom because he wanted to make sure that she really lived there because she didn't have a key to the house. It's like, why would he call her mom if he was going to rape her on the front porch, which she said he did. She told her mom later that she met a hot cop today. I mean, who calls their rapist a hot cop? Give me a break. It just, I mean, everything about this case is just, there's really just nothing, no
like
accusation that really
all of it is a
bothers
circus.
It
Yeah,
is.
it seems like all of it is made up. And I just wonder how much of it was to kind of, as you alluded to, kind of keep the city from blowing up, to put it frankly, like to keep the trouble from their door.
Yeah,
I really think
absolutely.
if people, people say, oh, that's ridiculous, Kay. But I've done a lot of research into, so if you just Google Oklahoma City MAPS projects, MAPS, you'll see the billions of dollars and all the money they've spent on improving our city, our capital city. It makes the most sense to me.
I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, so a few years after this, you see what can happen when the destruction comes to downtown,
Yeah.
And it was already happening pretty much by the time Daniel got arrested, because he doesn't get arrested until August. And it's just on the heels of Ferguson. So all through, and and all those riots play out before he goes to trial. The end of he goes to trial, I think, in November of 2015. And I think it was, oh man, I forget. I have a real hard time keeping all these facts inside my head. I think it was like a 6-week trial. Maybe it was just 4, but at the time it was the longest trial in Oklahoma history.
All fabricated,
Yeah,
all fabricated
yeah,
by the people that are supposed to protect us.
just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, let me just quickly run through some of these other accusers, just some of the things
If we
that were.
could, yeah, if we could, where's the one that came back and said, no, it wasn't Daniel that she pointed out? Did I misread that somewhere? 'Cause I know,
No, yeah, Sherry
okay,
Ellis Smith now. She claims that after Daniel stopped his patrol car, she was walking in the street. He pat searched her inappropriately, touched her breasts and vaginal area, checked her for warrants, found she had city warrants. He used those against her to make her comply, you know, when he exited the car, and orally sodomized her. And then she's one of the ones that said his penis, I mean, it was just there. So I didn't see him get it out. It was just there. She then claims that he drove away to a park, which they kept referring to this park as an abandoned schoolyard, because I guess that sounds worse, when in fact it really was a park. And you know, there is an abandoned school there, and there is an area, but officers in that area, when they stop, because these Terry stops that Oklahoma City trains their officers to do, that crap needs to go away. I mean, he was trained. It was his job to stop people, get as much intel as he could. He was trying to figure out the drug trade, the human trafficking trade. Who are the players? What are they doing? You know, he was watching drug houses. One of these accusers is a drug house that he was watching, and we've since found some of these other women are connected to that person and that drug house. But Sherry Ellis, she said in her deposition that she finally saw Daniel. She didn't see him, Daniel Holtzclaw. The first time she ever saw him was at trial.
wow. Yeah, that is just amazing. And they still, now, was she one of the ones that,
He got like 62 years or something for her. Yeah, I think it was 62 or 63 years.
for a coerced lie
Yeah,
that the Oklahoma City Police Department built?
unbelievable.
So I think probably in wrapping up, right? I am just amazed that you, as a regular citizen, took time out to question your own bias and watch that video again to see something, less biased.
Mhm.
And then you got so deeply involved, right?
Yeah,
I am amazed, and I'm sure Daniel is very, very thankful that you did that,
he is
right?
grateful.
Yes.
I
And the
mean,
family too.
yeah, Daniel's so grateful to all of his supporters, and he has a lot of supporters, and he needs a lot of supporters because, um, this isn't an easy case to, once you think, oh, this monster, he can just die in prison for all I care. Because anyone who would do these things to this many women and abuses power like that, we don't care what happens. And okay, yeah, I get that. But, uh, you know, to be able to step back and see that, oh my gosh, these things that have been told to me by the media, they're not true. They take things, they twist them around. The prosecutor was horrible. In his closing argument, he said that the DNA on Daniel's pants came from vaginal fluid from the walls of a 17-year-old when he raped her. Okay, that wasn't evidence.
I was going to say, that's not even part of the story.
Well, no, because they didn't test for vaginal fluid. They didn't test for saliva. They only tested that one area, the outside and inside of the fly. They didn't, their story, we didn't have a test for vaginal fluid or saliva at the time. I think if you're going to send someone to prison for the rest of their life, you might better find some money in your budget to send the sample to an outside lab, to send the evidence to an outside lab to make sure, what is this?
Exactly.
Because when 6 world-renowned scientists looked at this case and filed an amicus brief with Daniel's direct appeal, they all said Daniel needs a new trial. This is clearly consistent with transfer DNA from non-sexual contact.
Right. And the fact that he had been in contact with all 3 of those people that evening was not contested. Like that was,
right.
he had been in that situation.
And that to me is just such Hollywood trickery. As soon as you say rape and DNA, you've convinced the public that this is sperm DNA, right? Dr. Phil did the same thing when he did the Cammie Vaughn story. Dr. Phil said there was sperm all over, right? So you get this vision of DNA, sperm. I may have said that wrong. There was DNA all over, right? And so you get this vision that it's sperm, when in fact, it was DNA evidence from him and his jacket, which he gave her to wear to keep her warm. So that's, projecting this out there to the public as sperm is DNA. Sperm doesn't always mean that.
As far as
you'll have to fix that
male DNA goes, as far as the male DNA goes, that unknown male DNA could be Detective Rocky Gregory's DNA too, because he put his hand inside the sack. It could be the unknown female DNA. It could be transfer DNA from Terry Morris's refusal to prosecute form, because Rocky Gregory had that with him in the interview room. He had that file that she had her hand like this on the paper when she was signing that. She had her hands all over that paper. And then, okay, just because it's several months later, it doesn't matter. The DNA is still on that paper. If you touch it and then you hand Daniel a pen, or you put your hand inside the evidence bag, you're going to transfer whatever's on your hand to that sack. So just, if we could just figure out, if we had the ability to test and get samples from people to rule them out, it would be great, but it doesn't happen.
I agree. I know when DNA testing first came out, I think late 80s, early 90s, was it? It helped exonerate a lot of people, but I always was suspicious that it would be so easy for officers to take DNA and plant it on evidence. I was always very concerned about that. And now here it is coming to light. Kay, as we wrap up, Daniel has 263 years in prison, basically the rest of his life. And there's an appeal. Is that still going on to get him out?
So what has happened so far is his direct appeal was or his conviction was upheld by the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. And what they did was kind of, they had to cover this issue with the lab analyst incorrect testimony up, because that was an issue that he raised in his direct appeal. They had to cover that up. And so what they did was they had secret hearings for 2 days in 2017, where we have found out from depositions that the subject of those secret hearings, which, by the way, Daniel nor his attorney were allowed to attend. So is that America? I don't know. I do know. It was basically, and they're calling it a personnel. This is sealed because it's a personnel issue. No, if it's attached to Daniel's appeal, then it's Daniel's appeal. And if it happens to be a personnel issue, that's secondary to his civil rights. But Oklahoma County, and specifically the judge, who has now had to step down because of allegations of inappropriate sexual assault with assistant district attorneys who were trying cases in his courtroom. So you got that scandal going on now. But this judge has been overseeing everything. And that's another screwed up thing with these cases is you can't get, I mean, how much sense does it really make to have the trial judge involved in the case after the trial? You're never going to get any kind of relief from a judge who has already declared that you're a monster.
Absolutely. Yeah. We should have a different way of doing this.
So it's just right now we did file a petition, a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court, which they declined to hear, which was really expected. I think they only hear like 2% of the cases before them.
Right.
And so we're in the process of the post-conviction application back here in Oklahoma. And that's what we're working on right now.
Kay, I really thank you for coming forward and helping explain Daniel's story.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I can't imagine what Daniel's going through. And I know you told me in a previous conversation that he's getting a lot of support. I can't imagine what his dad, what his sister, what the whole family is going through.
His parents, that breaks my heart for his parents and his sister, his sisters. Yeah, how you can count how many lives were damaged by your own
exactly
your own case that you're involved in with your son. I closed my business and retired, and I have time to do this. It'd be more fun to be doing something else besides this, because frankly, this isn't good for your health too. This is just negative all the time. And it does.
Well, and it really opens your eyes to the level of corruption and negative things that are happening. This is just Oklahoma City, but it's probably happening everywhere too.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is the sad part.
It also makes you look for different ways to get relief, because you realize, we need to while we're working on this case, we also need to choose a district attorney candidate, and we need to volunteer we need to put our energy there. We need to call all of these senators and representatives. We need to constantly be looking at legislation that they're trying to push through in Oklahoma, which they're trying to do some stuff in Oklahoma right now that makes it even harder for innocent people to get relief. So it's just all these different things that you need to be doing all at the same time. And it's all consuming. It is.
It is. And you know what? I thank God for you,
Yeah.
right? Just a normal, everyday citizen that saw something and took the time to investigate and to become an advocate for Daniel Holtzclaw.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right, it is draining. It is a lot of work. It's negative on your health, but just know that your work will make an impact. It is making an impact, and it will make change.
Yeah.
With the recent reauthorization of VAWA, if anyone really dug into that, they would see how these cards are stacked against our men and how easy it is for the system to stack the lies against our men under the guise of truth.
Well, what other kind of crime are you accused of where you're automatically guilty? And I'm sorry, I was involved with the YWCA as a board member and a board chair and an advocate for 8 years. And I understand how difficult it is for true victims to get justice, because it's horrible to have to relive things, but there's just no other way. There's no other way. I mean, if you are a victim and you come forward, you should know you're just going to have to jump through the hoops, because you can't just, because we feel sorry for this person, we believe everyone. We believe you. I hate that phrase. I mean,
you have to have due process.
You do.
Due process
you have
is painful sometimes, but we have to have that.
Yeah, if we can't follow the facts in search of the truth, we're never going to have justice.
Right.
Exactly.
And so what I would like to do is absolutely repeal VAWA, just get rid of it, because they're still saying that sexual abuse is still the number one unreported, right? So what does that tell me? There's people out there that are not reporting. Why? Right? Because they don't want to go through this. Okay, let's make it not criminal. Let's just go with me for a minute. Let's give them an avenue. Let's give them resources where they can go and get help, right? But not the type of help where, if I claim someone raped me, I can get free rent. No, I'm not talking about that, right? But dealing with the person as a victim, instead of putting our men in court and giving them 7 years, 263 years, 15 years for things they didn't do, nor would they ever have thought about doing. So in closing, Kay, I would like to include a link at the end of our video to the 2-hour interview that Daniel did, as well as a link to Daniel in the Den, so that people can get more.
Right. And also one more is people who are into podcasts. The private investigator that was involved in the case, he has, on his own dime, created a podcast that follows the case from using the prosecution's timeline with the scrutiny of the defense. And he's 24 episodes into it, and he paused it because the accuser's attorneys were using him to do their investigation. So they were he was just getting buried in subpoenas. So it is, if you just go to Holtzclawtrial.com, has a link to everything, and he has a lot of great information. There are a lot of documents there for the case. So Holtzclawtrial.com, and the podcast is Bates Investigates. And then a Discord channel called Foul Play, and they are really deep into the Stephen Avery case, which is another case of planted evidence. They have uploaded a lot of Daniel's documents, his court documents, to their website, and it's foulplay.site. And then he has a little tab there. So those are all great resources to learn about the case. And thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our true stories. If you have a story to share about a man in your life, please reach out to us at www.womenagainstfalseaccusations.ncfm.org. The National Coalition for Men has been advocating for men and the women who love them since 1977. Our NCFM Women's Group offers emotional support and a place to actively work together to raise awareness around false accusations. Remember, you are not alone. Join us to learn more.